All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's January the 4th, the year 2016. I hope you're having a great start to the new year. I have just spent the last hour and a half watching part 4 of Brady Byram's KentHovenIsInnocent.com website. It's all about structuring. I wanted to talk about my reaction to spending that 1 hour and 24 minutes. I took some notes as I watched it. And it can be a very dry topic, right? But ultimately, Kent Hovind was imprisoned for 9 years. All of his property was stolen. His wife, Jo Hovind, was put in prison for a year. And Paul Hansen, who tried to help out Mr. Hovind, spent a year in prison. And so this is, even though the material may be dry as Brady is going through it for people that are not interested or excited in legal statutes or federal regulations, I wanted to try to share with you guys some background information, because, you know, when you use these words like structuring and federal regulations and statutes and money laundering, people tend to go to sleep. But see, there's real people's lives that are being destroyed, and there's wicked doers that are doing wicked things that's ultimately resulting in innocent men being thrown in prison and their reputations and property being stolen. So I made this PowerPoint here to show you some of the key players, and I want to go through Brady's video, but I want to give you some context, and I want to give you some resources and some backdrop. So the lady on the right is Judge Margaret Worston Rape Catherine Rogers. You need to go find the sentencing. I made a video and I read Kent Hovind's sentencing. It's absolutely horrific what she says about Kent Hovind before she sends him to prison. And you can see the biasness and the slant, the absolute hatred that she has for Kent Hovind. People will tell me, because I've got in discussions with what I thought were reasonable people, and they'll say things like, well, she stayed within the sentencing guideline and she didn't show any bias against Kent Hovind. I was like, well, you know, first of all, if he's innocent and he shouldn't have had any charges convicted at all, and there was fraud perpetrated against Kent Hovind by the IRS, and if there was fraud perpetrated by the Department of Justice, then she shouldn't have allowed any of the charges to stand in her courtroom. And so to argue she stayed within the sentencing guidelines, so I think that you know, she was not biased, I see as a very narrow-minded viewpoint. She was absolutely biased against Kent Hovind. Not only that, but she initiated the new charges where they tried unsuccessfully. It was the first victory in that Pensacola courthouse in 9 years, but they tried unsuccessfully to keep him in prison for the rest of his life. And so Judge Margaret Worston Rape Catherine Rogers, as soon as Kent Hovind was freed and he was allowed to leave that courtroom and you know, rejoin society, that courthouse was condemned for mold, and it's going to have to be torn down or rebuilt at a cost of $30 million. I'm not sure which. But this lady right here is absolutely wicked, and she needs to spend the rest of her life in prison behind bars for her role in Kent Hovind's case. This man right here, John David Roy Atchison, was a pedophile, and he was one of the lead prosecutors. My understanding is he seized the bank accounts, and he was the one who told them to open up all the financial belongings so that the government could take it over. This John David Roy Atchison got on a plane to go have sex with a 5-year-old, or it might have been a 4-year-old, and he had a jar of Vaseline and a doll. He told the lady over the internet that he was going to go visit, that he had done it several times before, and he was going to be gentle, right? He was an absolute wicked, evil man. When they put him in a jail cell after they caught him, he hung himself, and he died on October the 5th, 2007. That was the kind of prosecutors that came against Kent Hovind and charged him with trumped-up fraudulent charges. This lady right here, U.S. Prosecutor Michelle Heldemeyer, also participated in the fraud, and she needs to be held accountable, and she can share a cell right next to Judge Margaret Worston Rape Catherine Rogers, and they can eat moldy food on prison lunches and moldy prison trays for the rest of their natural life. The man on the right, IRS agent Scott Snyder, he tried to further his career by taking down a wildly popular Ken Hovind, and he was all about furthering his career. He's very similar to these people who don't have any sense of fairness or justice or righteousness. They're all about convicting anybody they can in order to promote their own selves and promote their own career. So he's another wicked evildoer that needs to spend the rest of his life in prison. There is some videos that I want to recommend before I get into my notes with Brady. This video right here, I titled "The IRS is Full of Thieving Idiots from Hell Who Will Pay for Their Sins." It talks about how they seized money from this farmer, a dairy farmer. Did you know that my grandfather opened up the second dairy farm in all of Texas? In all of Dallas. It's called Morning Star Dairies. My father was raised on a dairy farm, so I very much relate to dairy farmers. I think they are incredibly hardworking people. My dad was one of the hardest working men I've ever met in my life, and he was raised on a dairy farm. But when the government seized this man's money, it was absolutely wicked. And they don't even recognize what they're doing as wicked because they're wicked. They're so wicked themselves. So I suggest you watch this video because it involves structuring. It involves what happened to Ken Hovind. During the case of Ken Hovind, did you know that Dennis Hastert was convicted of structuring as well? Brady shows us in the middle of his video that the government agency, CIA, FBI, whatever government agency that wants to, can go ask the bank for your financial records, and they can find out all of your financial transactions, and the bank is absolutely forbidden to tell you that the government did that. So your Bank of America or your American South Bank or whatever bank you bank with, they are obligated to turn over all your financial transactions, all the details, and give it to the government, and they're by law prohibited from telling you that they did that. The reason I bring up Dennis Hastert is he was accused, 4 people accused him of sexual abuse. Some of them are reported to possibly have been minors, and they were also male. So not only is he a faggot, but he's a pedophile faggot, and he was withdrawing money to pay hush money to his abuse victims in order to keep them quiet. And they actually convicted him on structuring. That brought structuring to light during the case of Ken Hovind. I want to also share with you of 2 videos that I made. You can search these titles. Rudy demonstrates the felony of structuring, why they put Ken Hovind in prison. Because when you're in a conversation with somebody and you're just talking to somebody brand new and they've never heard the word structuring, it sounds complicated, and it's like, he must have done something wrong because he spent 9 years in prison. He got 45 counts of structuring, for goodness sake. It had to be complicated. It had to be like he must have did something. No, in this video right here, which I uploaded on January the 20th of 2015, I actually commit a so-called felony. I get out of my truck and I go to my bank and I videotape the whole transaction, and I withdraw $9,999.99. And you can see me walking up to the bank, and I withdraw the money. The teller gives me the money, and I even put my receipt, and I walk out of the bank. That's exactly what Ken and Joe Hovind did, and why they Ken Hovind spent 9 years in prison. Joe Hovind spent 1 year in prison. And just in case people didn't get it the first time, I uploaded a second video and did it twice. And so this was uploaded May the 27th of 2015, and I did it a second time. And so I've showed that we should not be afraid of these tyrants. We should not be afraid of our banking institutions. And if you want to go withdraw $9,999.99 from your own bank, you should have the right to do that without being worried that they're going to SWAT team your house and throw you and your wife in prison. I suggest you watch this video here, Ken Hovind structuring indictment of false IRS admits wrongdoing. Ken Hovind goes through this himself. This is one of many videos where he's talked about this issue, and he calls it the stupidest law in the history of mankind. This article right here, I'll put the link in the information bar, but you can search on the title. The IRS has actually came out and apologized for seizing bank accounts of small businesses. And the problem is they didn't apologize to Ken Hovind. They didn't pay him for the damages they've done. They didn't put the evildoers. They didn't put Judge Margaret Worsen raped Casey Rogers. They didn't put Michelle Heldemeyer, and they didn't put Scott Schneider in prison. They didn't hold them accountable for the evil that they did. Matter of fact, they probably got promoted. They probably have gotten bonuses. Loretta Lynch and Eric Holder probably took them out to a steak dinner, same way they took Schaefer Cox's prosecutors to a steak dinner. And this guy, his bones need to be dug up and interred and fed to the pigs, as far as I'm concerned. But in any event, this article right here by Los Angeles Times talks about how the IRS admitted they've done wrong, but they didn't overturn the verdicts of all the people that got convicted, and they didn't return all the property. Ken Hovind still has a felony conviction. He's on probation right now, and I figure, I don't know, several $1 trillion he's owed in vindication and reparations for his false imprisonment. But anyway, this is the backdrop, right? And so now let's get to Brady's notes. And I just want to say thank God for Brady Byrum. Thank God that he has the patience to sit in the SMU Law Library and to go through every one of these statutes and to put out these videos. He's got 8 videos. This is only my notes and my reaction to what I call reaction to video number 4. Again, it was 1 hour and 24 minutes long. And let's go through it. In video 3, he covered charges 1 through 12. Which was failure to withhold and pay. He absolutely proved that Ken Hovind is innocent, and he absolutely proved that there was fraud involved. The next video, video number 4, he goes through 45 counts of structuring. He goes through the specific statutes and federal regulations. Okay? United States Code statutes and the federal regulations. He talks about how they're intertwined and how they are dependent upon one another. The exemptions, the modifiers, and the qualifiers. He goes through all the details. He even has flow charts that he shows. I've also heard it I've also heard it said that this 45 counts of structuring, which was done over a 3-year period, was done to be trumped up charges against Ken Hovind. And this 45 counts, if you're withdrawing your money and you don't know that it's illegal, it's not proper for the government to go back 3 years and to say, well, you did this 3 years, it's 45 times, therefore you got to spend 10 years in prison. 45, I've heard it argued that case law has, even though I don't think Brady brought this up in his particular video, that should have been treated as 1 count of structuring. Because they didn't know it was illegal the first time, they didn't know that it was illegal the 45th time, so just because they did it repeatedly doesn't mean you get to charge them with 45 different counts. And that's what they did. And that's why he got such a long prison sentence. But the judge should have had a little bit of common sense. Let me ask you something. Do you think it was right that Ken Hovind spent nearly 10 years in prison for withdrawing his own money from his own bank to pay his own bills with legitimately raised money? If you think that was right, then you and I we're a different species of animal. We got a completely different baseline of what is ethical and what is right and wrong. But in any event, Brady makes the point that the prosecution, when they were arguing in front of the jury, that they made it a big deal that Ken Hovind was using cash and that he was depositing money and withdrawing money. And so what? So what if you're withdrawing cash? It's not a crime to deal in cash. A lot of people deal in cash, and it's not a crime. And just because drug dealers may do it, don't mean that everybody that deals in cash is a drug dealer. And certainly Ken Hovind was not dealing in drugs. Brady covers the indictment on page 5. He shows the value of the checks and the dates that they were withdrawn. I think it was 45 different withdrawals over a 3-year period, if I'm not mistaken. Brady covers the details of the specific statutes of which Ken Hovind was convicted. He goes through the wording, and that's very important. If you're going to spend nearly 10 years in prison, you want to understand the details of the wording of the so-called statute that you broke. Brady identifies a spider web of exemptions, modifiers, and qualifiers. Brady goes through all of them. Brady explains how they misapplied the structuring law statutes intended for money laundering and drug cartels to Ken Hovind's Creation Science Evangelism and Dinosaur Adventureland Ministry. He talks about how there was a fraud perpetrated in that courtroom and there was a wrongful conviction gotten from the jury because they painted a picture that was not accurate. Brady spends a lot of time reading the detailed wording of the statutes, which is good for legal-oriented people. For the rest of us, it can be a bit dry, but ultimately, if this will help hold evildoers accountable, and if Judge Margaret Worston-Rape Casey Rogers, Michelle Heldemeyer, IRS Special Agent Scott Snyder go to prison, then I'll spend the time going through all the statutes with Brady, and I appreciate him taking the time to lead me through it. Brady did a really good job at filtering through all the qualifying laws and how they impact the application to the Hovind case. Brady makes the point that all of the stuff he showed, which shows that the Hovinds were exempt from the structuring laws, were never shared with the jury. And that was absolutely a fraud. That the jury was entitled to see the exemptions and the qualifiers. So Brady goes through the specifics of the what I would call the exemptions to criminality. Brady shows the details of the modifiers. I'm not going to read all this detail. He shows specific portions of the trial transcript that back up Brady's points, that where Michelle Heldemeyer is talking to that judge. He covers the list of prohibited industries. He goes through various reasons that release the Hovinds from criminality. The point that I want to make, and I said it before, but it's worth saying again, the FBI, the CIA, the DIA, the NSA, any government that's part of an intelligence community, any government agent can walk up to your bank and demand to see the details of your banking transactions. And the bank is required by law to hand that over, and they are prohibited from telling you that they did that. So rest assured that your enemies in government, they know exactly what you spend your money on. They follow you, and they're looking at you through a microscope. Guaranteed. That's what they did to Ken Hovind. Brady covers multiple exemptions on why people should not be held criminally responsible for the act of structuring. And he talks about how the Hovinds qualified under those exemptions because they had the account for more than 12 months. They were not engaging in any criminal activity, and he goes through the details of all of that. Brady summarizes at the end of the video the 9 reasons why the Hovinds were not criminal. Brady says that all the transactions were under $10,000 and that the applicable case law, which he cites, were reversed prior to the Hovind indictment. Number 2, that was number 1. Number 2 is that the IRS did not follow the law regarding bank reporting form 4789. So it was not mandatory for the banks to file to begin with. All applicable Reynos case law charges were thrown out because the IRS form 4789 is not actually required. And without a requirement, there is no criminality ever for structuring. So Brady makes the case that the bank did not have a requirement to file that form, and in the Hovind situation, and because they didn't have the requirement, there was no structuring. Reason number 3, he goes through multiple mandatory exemptions for qualified businesses, which the Hovinds were. Number 4, there were discretionary exemptions for qualified businesses, which secondarily applied. Number 5, there was a particular statute that links to mandatory exemptions in the regulations. Number 6, the definition of structuring on the federal regulations is modified by another federal regulation which contains another exemption from criminality which applied to the Hovinds. Number 7, the Internal Revenue Manual, he gives a specific place, says bank customers can be exempt. Number 8, there are no ministries on the exclusion list. Therefore, CSC, Dinosaur Adventureland, and Ken Hovind is required to be on the automatically exempt list. Number 9, there are no ministries on the secondary scrutiny industry list. Brady goes on to say that the prosecutors participated in fraud against Kent and Joe Hovind, and the judge accepted this fraud. He concludes, every single structuring charge across America should be reversed right now. and inmates compensated for false imprisonment. If structuring charges were used for sentencing enhancements, then the prisoners need a new sentencing hearing. So, thank you, Brady, for doing this video on structuring. I am completely convinced that these people committed fraud against Kent and Joe Hoven, and that Kent Hoven should have never spent a day in prison for withdrawing his own money from his own bank to pay his own bills with legitimately raised money. I think structuring is the stupidest law in the history of the United States, and people use it to target political dissidents of the establishment, or they use it to get convictions on high-profile targets in order to further their own career. We should not rate prosecutors on their ability to convict. We should rate prosecutors on their ability to promote justice. And all of these people, whether they're dead or whether they're alive, they need to be held accountable for the wickedness that they've done. And I'll close off this video by reading Psalms 37:20. But the wicked shall perish, and the enemies of the Lord shall be as the fat of lambs. They shall consume into smoke, shall they consume away.